They told me faith was jumping blind off the edge of reason into endless night. But heaven whispered through ancient pages, son, faith has footprints across the ages. Adam carried Eden in his memory. 9 generations drank the testimony. The voice of God echoed through the bloodline. Truth preserved beyond the boundaries of time. Noah heard the warnings in the silence. Built an ark while surrounded by violence. Mocked by giants, laughed at by the crowd. Yet heaven's evidence was speaking loud. He did not leap without knowing. He stood on what God had already shown him. History became the anchor. Memory became the flame. Faith is not a leap into darkness. Faith is a calculation of promise. I read the record, I studied the scars. I saw his hand written across the stars. Oh yes, yesterday became my evidence. Oh, mercy became my confidence. So when tomorrow shakes beneath my feet, I lean my weight on what he's done for me. Abraham walked out a mighty earth, left behind comfort and the world he knew, trading golden cities for wilderness roads, because the voice of God outweighed human control. And Isaac, the miracle child of impossible.
Imagine for a moment that you are an aerospace engineer.
Okay.
And your supervisor comes in, hands you a complex mathematical equation, and just tells you to use it to build a theoretical spacecraft.
Right, a massive undertaking.
Exactly. But there's a catch. The underlying physics of this equation, well, they have never actually been tested in the real world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Would you get in that? Would you bet your actual life on a formula that only exists on a chalkboard?
You'd have to be deeply reckless to do that.
Right. Today, we are looking at a historical framework that suggests you wouldn't. And more importantly, that you were never meant to.
Yes.
Because when people talk about having faith, the cultural default is to view it as this ultimate blind leap.
A leap into the dark, yeah.
Yeah. You are supposed to stand at the edge of a bottomless pit, close your eyes, manufacture some feeling of intense certainty, and just jump. We literally pit faith directly against science, hard evidence, and empirical data.
We do. It is entirely framed as an absence of logic. The modern secular consensus basically says, well, if you have the facts, you don't need faith.
Exactly.
But when you examine the source material we are diving into today, that entire paradigm completely collapses. We are looking at audio transcripts and presentation slides from a teaching by Indu Hubert Eek at the ICOC JOS midweek service.
Which is a brilliant presentation, by the way.
It really is. And the central thesis of this presentation is that biblical faith is the exact opposite of a blind leap. It is, by definition, a meticulously kept historical case file. Indu led a teaching on biblical faith, explaining that it is built on evidence of what God has already done, rather than being a blind leap into the unknown.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this exact concept, what the teaching essentially frames as the case file of heaven.
Yes, the bedrock of our belief.
Right. So Indu walks the congregation through the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. And he focuses intensely on the timeline from Adam to Noah, the extreme obedience of Abraham. And then the service actually transitions to a speaker named Tunde.
Right, who provides a very practical application.
Yeah, a highly specific psychological application for the modern listener. We are going to examine how you can build an unbreakable experience database to anchor your future. But to understand how faith operates as hard data, the sources argue we first have to look at the oldest database in human history.
The Genesis 5 genealogy.
Exactly, Genesis chapter 5. And Indu's presentation leans heavily on the pure mathematics of this ancient timeline.
And what's fascinating here is that the math completely shifts how you view these historical figures. I mean, we tend to read the book of Genesis chronologically, right?
Just straight through.
And we assume these people existed in isolated sequential bubbles. You know, Adam lived, Adam died, then Seth lived, and so on. But when you actually graph out the lifespans provided in the text, the overlap is staggering. According to the timeline Indu presents, Adam lived for 930 years.
930 years.
Yes. That volume of time means he was a living, breathing archive for 9 generations.
He didn't just experience the Garden of Eden and then vanish.
No, not at all.
He was physically present. He passed down firsthand eyewitness accounts of, well, the naming of the animals, the original function of humanity, the tragic fall, and most importantly, the specific character of Yahweh.
The bedrock data.
Right. And the data in the presentation shows that Adam personally knew and shared these experiences with Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel.
Jared, Enoch.
Yes, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, and Lamech. Think about that. Lamech, who is Noah's father, was alive for over 50 years before Adam actually died.
That is the critical sociological data point right there.
Yeah.
Lamech could have literally walked into Adam's tent and asked him what the voice of God sounded like.
Wow.
Yeah. Noah is the very first major figure in this lineage who did not physically meet Adam. But Noah knew Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Methuselah, and of course his own father.
So he was surrounded by it.
He was surrounded by a community that held direct, verifiable accounts of the Creator.
But wait, I have to challenge this premise just a bit.
Go ahead.
Because we all know how the game of telephone works, right? You whisper a sentence around a circle of 10 people, and by the end, it's completely unrecognizable.
Sure, human error.
Yeah, oral history is notoriously fragile. If we are talking about a 900-year gap, human memory gets corrupted, people exaggerate, mickles are born. So if Adam was passing down this data for over 900 years, how did living in the echo of those ancients fundamentally change how Noah viewed reality? I mean, how could Noah trust a multi-generational story enough to bet his life on it?
Well, you see, that is a very modern skepticism. It's rooted in how casually we treat spoken information today.
Fair point.
But ancient Hebraic and Near Eastern oral traditions were not casual conversations. They were highly structured communal ledgers. Information was passed down through specific poetic structures, repetition, and strict community verification.
So it wasn't just folklore.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't one person whispering to another in secret. It was a societal record, constantly recited and guarded against error by the elders. Noah didn't step into his faith from a vacuum, and he didn't step into a vacuum of fuzzy myths. He stepped into a story already in motion, a robust living database that carried a very clear through line.
Which is what?
That God punishes corruption, but he preserves the loyal.
And Noah desperately needed that data.
He really did.
Because his reality was about to demand an impossible level of loyalty. God warns Noah that a global deluge is coming to wipe out all flesh because the earth has become entirely corrupt.
A threat he had never seen before.
Right. Rain wasn't even a proven concept in his environment. And God instructs Noah to build a massive gopher wood ark, cover it in pitch, inside and out, and do all of this right on dry ground.
It defies logic.
It does. Now, earlier I used the analogy of an aerospace engineer trusting an untested equation. But look, it's one thing to trust a math equation in a quiet lab. But to build a giant boat on dry ground while being mocked? I mean, surviving a local public relations nightmare is one thing. Building a boat the size of a modern battleship based on an unseen threat that borders on delusion.
To the outside world, absolutely.
So how does past evidence override immediate humiliation? Where is the actual line between a deeply held religious conviction and a psychological break?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you find that line by looking at the environmental context Noah was living in. The sources point out that Noah was enduring the ridicule of his generation, which Genesis chapter 6 notes included the Nephilim.
Right, the giant.
Yes. It is vital to understand that the Nephilim weren't just teenagers mocking the weird old man building a boat. The text describes them as men of renown, tyrants, violent giants of their era.
Oh, so this was a hostile environment.
Incredibly hostile. Noah was building this ark under the watchful eye of a violent, corrupt, and highly intimidating global regime. To stand against that level of societal threat requires more than a psychological break. It requires a superior anchor.
So how does he process that? I mean, how does he weigh the immediate threat of a violent society against the invisible threat of a coming flood?
He does it through two ancient Hebraic concepts that function together, Emunah and Kawa.
Emunah and Kaaba.
Yes. Emunah is often translated as faith, but literally it means firmness or steadiness. Think of a heavy peg driven deep into a solid rock wall.
Okay.
And Kawa means to bind together. It's often translated as waiting or hoping, kind of like the immense tension of a stretched string.
So firmness and tension.
Exactly. Noah's obedience flowed directly from awe and his faith-trust database. He took the firmness of his historical database, the accounts of creation and consequence passed down from Adam, and he used it to withstand the tension of waiting for the flood. He calculated that the unseen judgment of a faithful, unchanging God was a heavier, more concrete reality than the visible violence of his current society.
He weighed the empirical evidence. On one side of the scale, you have the immediate, visceral terror of a corrupt civilization. On the other side, you have a multi-generational, flawless track record of a creator who always follows through on his word.
And he chose the heavier evidence.
Yes, he chose the heavier evidence. He endured the tension because the historical data proved Yahweh's character was an immovable peg.
And the beautiful thing is, that ledger of evidence survives the flood. It doesn't wash away.
Right.
It is preserved and passed directly to the next era, which is where the timeline in our sources reveals another incredible overlap. According to the presentation, Noah lived 58 years into Abraham's lifetime.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that dramatically alters how you read the story of Abraham.
It completely reframes it.
He wasn't starting from scratch. He inherited this post-flood database of God's character. He had access to the architectural memory of the ark, the geological trauma of the flood, and the verifiable rescue of his ancestors.
The raw data of salvation.
Exactly. So when God commands Abraham to leave his country and his father's house, it is a calculated risk.
Right.
But we really need to define what he was actually leaving, because the sources note that he left Ur of the Chaldeans.
Yes.
Culturally, we tend to picture these ancient figures as wandering shepherds living in tents. So, moving to a new field doesn't seem like a massive deal.
That is a massive misconception. Ur was a highly developed Sumerian civilization. Endu actually compares it to a modern metropolis, equivalent to modern-day Japan.
Really? Like a high-tech hub?
Yes. We are talking about a city with massive ziggurats, complex legal codes, international trade routes. They had advanced astronomy, mathematics, and even sophisticated indoor plumbing. It was the absolute pinnacle of human security and technological advancement for its time.
So God tells him to abandon the peak of human civilization. With no GPS, no map, and no ultimate destination, just to the land, which I will show you. To leave Ur was to leave behind empirical safety.
Security, wealth, comfort.
All of it. You are trading walled cities and a predictable economy for an unmarked path in a hostile wilderness based entirely on an inherited ledger. If Ur was the ancient equivalent of a high-tech metropolis like Tokyo, what kind of certainty makes a person leave that for an unmarked path in the wilderness just because of some inherited stories?
This raises an important question, and it touches on the core theological insight of this entire midweek service teaching. Abraham justified it by grasping one truth. The unseen future with God is fundamentally safer than the visible present without him.
Wow, safer in the unseen.
Yes. Abraham analyzed the civilization of Ur. He saw its wealth and its walls, but he also read the historical data of his ancestors. He knew that when the creator of the universe speaks, movement is the only logical response, regardless of how secure the present environment appears.
I have to stop you there, though.
Go ahead.
Because leaving a city is one kind of sacrifice. But if we are defining faith as a mathematical calculation, a historical reality, we have to talk about the ultimate test, the binding of Isaac.
The hardest test of all.
Right. To the modern ear, a father taking his promised son up a mountain to sacrifice him isn't a calculation. It sounds like a severe psychiatric break, or at best, an act of fanatical, unquestioning terror. How do the sources justify calling that a logical or mathematical decision?
They justify it by looking specifically at the language in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19. The text says Abraham considered that God was able to raise Isaac from the dead. Yes. That word considered is translated from the Greek word logizomai. It is a literal accounting term. It means to reckon, to calculate, or to compute logically. Abraham wasn't acting out of blind, unthinking terror. He was doing math.
But what kind of math makes child sacrifice logical?
The math of precedent. Abraham looked at his own personal case file. God had promised him an heir. Abraham and Sarah were both nearly 100 years old. Biologically, scientifically, Sarah's womb was dead.
Right, it was impossible.
Yet Abraham had empirical physical evidence sitting in his tent, a laughing boy named Isaac. That boy was walking proof that God could bring life out of biological death. So as he walks up Mount Moriah, he computes the data. A God who can manufacture life from a dead womb can certainly resurrect life from dead ashes.
He reasoned that God could raise the dead. He didn't close his eyes and hope for the best. He opened his eyes, audited his own history, and deduced that God is a resurrecting God. His willingness to place Isaac on the altar wasn't the absence of reason, it was the climax of accumulated memory.
Which brings a profound theological reality to light. Yahweh operates differently than any other deity worshipped in the ancient Near East. The gods of Ur demanded blind appeasement and offered no guarantees. Yahweh essentially says, examine my record, I have nothing to hide, I invite the audit.
He wants you to check the ledger.
He wants his followers to base their trust on historical reality, not manufactured emotion.
And that invitation to audit the record is exactly where the service transitions from the ancient history of Genesis and Hebrews into the present-day reality of the listener. How does the ICOC Joe's community, how do you, listening to this deep dive right now, apply this exact same methodology to your modern life?
Because we aren't facing Nephilim.
Right. You aren't building a wooden ark to survive a flood, and you aren't abandoning ancient Mesopotamia.
This is where the application becomes incredibly practical. The service transitioned to a speaker named Tunde. He takes the microphone and shifts the congregation from admiring the biblical database to constructing their own. And he points out a staggering statistic. In the New Testament alone, there are over 750 explicit promises made to believers.
750 promises. That is a massive volume of data to draw from.
It is an ocean of evidence.
But listing 750 things from a stage would take all night. So Tunde isolates 10 specific ones to demonstrate the sheer scope of this modest database.
Right, and he starts with the heaviest ones. He talks about eternal security from John chapter 10, where Jesus states that no one can snatch his followers out of his hand.
A promise of safety.
Yes. He moves to Philippians 4, highlighting the promise of a perfect peace that literally transcends human logic and comprehension.
He also brings up the promise of unshakable, complete provision from God's limitless heavenly wealth.
Provision, yes.
And he emphasizes the guarantee of constant companionship found in Hebrews 13, the famous line, "Never will I leave you, never will I forsake you." And he goes all the way to Romans chapter 8, which outlines the promise of inseparable love, stating that absolutely nothing, not earthly crises, not political collapse, not spiritual warfare, can sever God's bond with you.
But here is the catch. Reading 750 promises out of a book is functionally useless if you don't connect those ancient promises to your immediate lived reality. Theological data means nothing until it becomes personal data.
So what does this all mean? How do we make it personal data?
Well, this is where a strict challenge was issued to the Joe's community. They were tasked with creating an evidence journal, a personal case file.
And the assignment was highly specific.
Very strict.
They weren't told to go home and write down fuzzy feelings or general expressions of gratitude. They were instructed to list 3 to 5 concrete things God has done in their lives since January. They had to include specific dates, specific details, and the actual measurable outcomes. And they were told to update this file weekly.
Every single week.
But I have to ask, is writing down 3 things God did 6 months ago really gonna stop a full-blown panic attack when you lose your job or get a terrifying medical diagnosis? It sounds a bit like toxic positivity, just slapping a nice Bible verse over a devastating real-world crisis.
It is actually the exact opposite of toxic positivity.
How so?
Toxic positivity requires you to invent a good feeling that doesn't exist. It asks you to ignore reality. Journaling your evidence forces you to confront reality, specifically the reality of your own brain chemistry.
Okay, unpack that.
When a crisis hits, say you lose your job, your brain undergoes an amygdala hijack. Your fight or flight response kicks in, cortisol floods your system, and your brain instantly prioritizes the immediate threat. In that state, you suffer from acute spiritual amnesia.
You literally cannot remember the times you were safe.
Exactly. You get complete tunnel vision on the disaster. So what an evidence journal does is engage your prefrontal cortex, the logical reasoning center of your brain. By forcing yourself to look at a physical piece of paper that says, on July 14th, that impossible financial barrier was cleared, or on October 3rd, that relational conflict was miraculously resolved, you are introducing hard empirical data into a panic attack.
You are citing historical precedent to calm your amygdala.
Yes, memory is the bridge between past experience and future promise. The act of writing down dates and outcomes prevents spiritual amnesia. It's a cognitive behavioral intervention wrapped in a theological exercise.
You are auditing your own life's financial statements instead of relying on emotional overdrafts. So many times when we hit a wall, we try to hype ourselves up. We try to force ourselves to feel faithful or manufacture blind optimism. But this teaching says, stop trying to invent feelings. Just look at the math. Look at the ledger.
And that changes everything about how you face tomorrow. You aren't leaping into the dark. You are stepping onto a bedrock of proven faithfulness.
Which brings this entire deep dive directly to you listening right now. Think about the physical, mental, and spiritual space you occupy today. What is currently sitting in your personal evidence file?
A vital question to ask yourself.
When you are staring down an uncertain future, maybe it's a massive career pivot, a lingering health scare, a fracturing relationship, are you standing on the edge of the cliff trying to muster up a blind leap in the dark? Are you exhausting yourself trying to just believe harder?
Or are you relying on the concrete data?
Exactly. Are you opening the file and leaning your entire weight onto the concrete, documented data of what you have already seen and heard God do?
The invitation of the ancient text and the challenge from the Joe's congregation is not to close your eyes. It is to open them, read the record, and do the math.
What if the paralyzing anxiety you feel about your future isn't actually a lack of faith at all? What if it is simply a case of poor record keeping?
That is profound.
What critical exhibits are missing from your personal case file right now simply because you survived the crisis, moved on, and forgot to write down the date? And consider this. What if the very trial you are walking through today, the one keeping you awake at night, is simply God giving you the raw material for your next major journal entry?
The ink for tomorrow's certainty.
It might be time to put away the crystal ball you're using to try and perfectly predict tomorrow and instead sit down and start rigorously auditing the hard evidence of yesterday. As the sources remind the community, faith is leaning your entire weight onto the promises of tomorrow, using the unbreakable evidence of yesterday. Stand firm, Joe.
Studied the scars. I saw his hand written across the stars. Oh, yes, yesterday became my evidence. Oh, mercy became my confidence. So when tomorrow shakes beneath my feet, done for me. Abraham walked out a mighty earth, left behind comfort and the world he knew, trading golden cities for wilderness roads, because the voice of God outweighed human control. And Isaac, the miracle child of impossible years, proof that God resurrects dead atmospheres. So climbing Moriah with trembling breath, Abraham calculated beyond death. A barren womb became living proof that resurrection already moved. If God could speak life into hopeless dust, then even ashes could rise again through trust. Hey! Open the ledger, read the lines, look at the dates, remember the time. July breakthrough, October peace, the prayers you thought heaven ignored, but secretly released. Write it down. Don't forget the God who carried you through fire, yeah. The panic loses power when memory starts to speak, and fear begins collapsing when testimony stands complete. Faith is not emotion manufactured, not empty words and fragile chapters. Faith is standing on proven ground while storms and giants rage around. Saw the flood before the rain. Abraham saw life beyond the pain. And I will trust the God whose hands have carried generations through the flames. So I will not worship anxiety. I will not bow to uncertainty. I will audit the evidence and remember relentlessly the same God of Eden,
The same God of Noah,
the same God of Noah,
the same God of Abraham.
still walks beside us. Faith is leaning all your weight on tomorrow's promise, using yesterday's evidence.